Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Woodburn Accountants and Advisors China webinar series, where we will be looking at developing your China roadmap. So we're going to get straight on into the webinar, a few technical slides and a little bit of info that I would love to get to know from you. Again, plenty of new names here on today's session. There's been great resonance on people who have been wanting to join today's session as well. So how I usually start off these webinars is I ask a little bit about who you are. This gives me an understanding about who is on today's webinar session, how I should sort of direct the session, just starts basically the interaction that I hope will happen during today's webinar. So I usually categorize people into three groups. First of all are the newbies. So these are individuals, entrepreneurs, companies that are looking at an opportunity, trying to find an opportunity, trying to educate themselves on the opportunities that exist in China. And they're here basically to gain an education on China and how to start off the business and what they should do or what they should need to know in regards to transacting with Chinese companies. And the second group are the startups in China. And these are individuals that have set up companies in China, anywhere in China, and they have been established for a period of 1 to 3, 1 to 5 years. And they've been so focused on the core aspects of their business, whether that be sales, merchandising, service transactions, that they haven't really focused on the compliance and administrative functions, which can lead to a deceleration of your business. So many of you that are in that category, let me know. That also gives me a bit of an understanding where you would be on your China roadmap. And then obviously their experienced China hands. I'm one of those. I've been in China for over almost 17 years now, in Shanghai specifically. Regulations are consistently changing. So one of the key functions of the roadmap is about education, and everybody should be maintaining their education levels to understand what are the latest updates and regulations, how do I get new and fresh ideas or concepts to improve my business. It's always about improving the business so that you can focus on growth aspects, right? And not just simply growth, but acceleration of growth. Right? You don't want to just be stable, you want to continuously see those numbers increasing. So again, please do let me know who you are. It's always very helpful for me. So Kim said he's an oldie, I appreciate that. And Toza has been on my webinars before. She's a bit of a newbie and she's also here to educate herself. So again, let me know who you are. It does always help to understand who the majority of people are in today's session. So how the webinar works, well, I'm going to reveal to you what the China roadmap is. Okay, so there's a lot of educational points. I'll be highlighting a lot of case studies today of where things have gone wrong for companies. I'll be offering you tips. So this is basically over 60 minutes of your time, and I hope it becomes a valuable spend of your time. So take notes, ask questions if something is not clear for you. I will be staying online until all questions or comments are answered in the Q&A session. And I did read some of the comments and questions that were highlighted in the registration document, so I'll be touching on some of those throughout the presentation today. But please do use this as a valuable spend of your time. Just a technical point, we are using the GoToWebinar platform system. I don't own GoToWebinar, so I don't have a control system on how things work technically with it. And as I'm obviously presenting today, I cannot help you with technical issues. Please note, we are recording today's session. A copy of the presentation will be distributed to everybody. So if you get kicked off the system, I apologize. Try and get back on. If I get kicked off the system, which may happen, then please do stay on the line. It usually does take about 30 seconds to 1 minute for me to get logged back in. And it just might be because of a certain Wi-Fi issue that I'll be having. So don't exit. I will be coming on to finish the presentation today. All right, who am I? Well, to put a face to the voice, my name is Christina Kohler-Coluccia. I'm the head of business advisory at Woodburn Accountants and Advisors. I'm hitting up on my 17th year of being in Shanghai. I've only been in the corporate services and compliance sector, and my focus or my niche has always been helping foreign investors with their inbound entry into China. So I've been helping companies with their pre-investment strategy stage, their implementation, as well as their growth in China, which are all the 3 milestones, as you can imagine, that are in the China roadmap method, okay? Which we will be highlighting on today. Now, if you enjoyed today's session, you may be interested in joining our webinar series, which is at the end of July. So we hold a webinar series every month. The one for July is from the 27th to the 30th. We're going to be going through 4 different topics on 4 different dates, looking from everything at market research, 6 ways to do business in China without an entity, setting up a rep office, setting up a business in China. We'll be going through all of those details. If you are interested in participating, go to woodburnglobal.com/events. The webinars are already up there and the links for registration are also up there, okay? So listen in today, because a lot of what I'll be mentioning in today will be in that webinar series, but we will be going in much greater detail on certain specific aspects. So today we're going to be looking at your China roadmap. Now, every single company that I have collaborated with over the last 16, almost 17 years has had a different roadmap, okay? But there have been very specific points in everybody's journey that has been replicated. So everyone's gone through certain frustrations, which are all pretty similar. Everyone has gone through certain obstacles, and they've gone through those obstacles because they weren't prepared enough in certain aspects, which is why it's so important for you all to know what is this China roadmap and how can you better prepare yourselves to avoid the frustrations and obstacles that will eventually occur, okay? So even today, 16, 17 years down the line, I still incur obstacles. I still incur frustrations, but I'm actually so much better prepared that I can even see warning signs before that issue escalates. So I can actually preempt it from happening in a greater format that might disrupt my business. Because I am so much more aware. And I'm hoping that today's roadmap will give you all bullet points and action plans that can lead you on to the next stages or phases of your China journey. So what is the China roadmap? So the China roadmap consists of 3 milestones and what I call, in order to make this a little bit more glamorous, 9 superpowers, okay? 3 milestones are opportunity. It's extremely important to evaluate an opportunity to make sure and to see whether it makes sense for you, okay? And there are 3 superpowers allocated to basically answering the question, have I found an opportunity and do I know how I'm going to grasp at that opportunity? The next phase is then implementation. You know you're going to go in the market, you've got a positive outcome, you know that there's an opportunity, now you're going to get that opportunity by implementing a structure. Now again, many people confuse this when I say structure because they make the assumption that it is a requirement to set up an entity in China. Nobody is required to set up an entity in China. You can start off your business by doing things from your home jurisdiction, from your headquarters, or from another subsidiary, whether that be in Asia, whether Hong Kong, Singapore, or another location. Nobody is forcing you to set up anything in China, and that's what I want to emphasize on this China roadmap, okay? Implementation is about setting up a structure that protects your business, but helps you to then implement other structures in different phases, all right? And we'll be tackling that today. The next milestone is growth. All right, once you have that structure in place Again, whether it's an entity in China or a structure you've developed from your head office, as an example, you need to be able to focus on growth. So you need to be able to look at your China numbers, analyze those numbers, understand those numbers in order to be able to make decisions and focus on the growth. Okay? Nobody can make any decision about the direction their company should go in if they do not know the numbers of their company. And by numbers, I mean revenue, costs, general administrative expenses, etc. Okay? If you can't read those and understand them, there's no way you can analyze your business. Okay? That's why you've got a finance team in your head office doing that function for you to help you to make decisions and create scenarios to go on the right path. Okay, so that's what my hope is today, is to show you these 9 superpowers and what you need to do as an action plan in each of those superpowers. Okay, so there is a lot of information I'll be going on, but why is this important? Okay, what are the problems if you don't follow the roadmap? Okay, and these are the case studies that I want to highlight today. So the first case study that I want to highlight today is regarding an Austrian candy company that I met probably back in 2006, 2007. They met with me in my Shanghai office, and quite frankly, I didn't understand the purpose of the meeting. And when they were also in the meeting, the outcome was they also had no clarity, right? But this is what they had done. They had actually already put a 40-foot container product on the water that at the point of the meeting was going to arrive in 4 weeks' time at a Shanghai port. So I said, oh, okay, wow. So this means that you've got a distributor, you've got a consignee, you've got a local logistics provider, you know the sales channels that you're going to be selling in. They had no idea. They had none of this information. Their thought process was that after the meeting, in the next few days after, they were going to join a trade show. There would be so much interest in their product. However, mind you, they weren't exhibiting. And that they would get orders immediately, and they wanted the product to be on the ground so that they could sell it straight away. Without realizing that in the food and beverage industry, a lot of the functions are done through distributors and are not necessarily done direct. If you work with some of the big supermarkets, they will not want to work direct with suppliers from overseas. They will want to work with either import-export agents or actual distributors that have knowledge and expertise in the food and beverage market and that have vetted you, because these large supermarkets are not going to do the vetting on you. Okay? So they came completely unprepared to the Chinese market, completely unprepared. They did minimal research. They hadn't created a network of people to speak to. They didn't even understand the food and beverage process, the physical trading process, which requires inspections, right? The CIQ, they have to look at your product, they have to look at samples and test it and provide authorization. And once they've provided authorization, you can then create Chinese labels that would be placed on the packaging of these products. They had no clue how this was going to work from start to finish. And ultimately, what happened was that they didn't get the orders that they had thought were going to come in. And they had to ship back a 40-foot container of product, which in the end, I think hit the expiry date because these are very fragile items. And they threw it away. So I want to highlight really the aspect here. When you are investigating an opportunity, please make sure you educate yourself and you talk to as many people as possible about what you need to know. Plus, doing research, creating focus groups. Do people actually like your product? Do they want your product? All right. And then creating a business plan where you know what to do in phase 1, phase 2. The next case study that I want to look at is, and I highlighted this actually in the webinar series from 2 weeks ago, is again a German company that entered the Chinese market utilizing a distributor. And this distributor was to sign an exclusive agreement and to also allow this distributor to have control and access over their most valuable assets, predominantly their trademark. Now, as a result, 15 years down the line, relationship is still great, but the company is thinking, you know what, China has improved so much, we could actually go it alone. We've made the contacts, we've got the connections, we can eliminate this distributor, take out their margin and earn more by having our own entity in China. And what happened was they realized they didn't own the trademark. The distributor did. And the distributor revealed this to them at the point of trying to terminate their services. And he said, I'm not willing to sell you the trademark, but we can have a licensing agreement that for whatever sales you incur, you give me a fee, a percentage. So in the end of the day, nothing changed. Even if they were going to set up their own entity, they would still have to pay something to the distributor because he owned the trademark. So it's extremely important to also know what you want to do in the short term, what you want to do in the long term, and how you are going to protect all of your assets. Okay, it's not just about trademarks. It's about everything from patents, copyrights, internal procedures. Okay, you've got to make sure that these things remain in your control. And you think about these aspects very clearly when developing your business plan. This also follows on from trademark registrations, okay? So this is also an example of a consumer products company that 100% produces in China, but does not sell in China. So basically, they've outsourced their full production to around 80, 90 suppliers in China, producing a whole variety of parts and the full finished consumer products, everything from hair dryers, microwaves, etc. Quite a big brand in Europe, but not selling in China. So for them, they thought because they're not selling in China, there's absolutely no need for them to register their trademark, because you only need to register your trademark if you're selling into a country. This is a false perception to have. You register your trademark if you are physically doing any sort of business in China. Okay? Now, what happened here? They had a falling out with a supplier. They canceled the contract with the supplier. The supplier lost face, and as a revenge tactic, maybe that's too strong of a word, but I'll use it as a revenge tactic, this supplier registered their trademark in China. They then did the registration at the Customs Bureau so that upon export from all suppliers, every single product got halted at customs and couldn't be exported. So in order to rearrange things very quickly, they eliminated all of the packaging that had the brand name. As long as the product didn't have the brand name, they made sure the packaging also didn't have the brand name, and they were able to export those portions of goods. But those goods that did have the brand name on, impossible to get it released. And it took a trial of between, I think, 3 to 4 months with the supplier to show that they had done this in bad faith before they could export. This happened at Christmas time, so it eliminated a huge chunk of their business sales from occurring during Christmas. So again, you've got to plan ahead, and you've got to think smartly about how you're going to protect your business. This next case study is a joint venture. It was a joint venture that was set up in Tianjin. It was a leather accessories firm from Australia. They set up with a mainland Chinese individual that had a full distribution network for their product. It was a manufacturing joint venture. After 3 years, they came to us saying that they would like us to conduct a health check and internal audit to answer basically the most important question, which is why were they not growing? Why were they not profitable? So this audit revealed many more points, but the main 3 points were: one, The Australian party had been receiving financial management reports from China. They were only received in Chinese language. And truly, it is at the fault of the Australian company for never having gotten them translated or having never asked for a translation. Okay, so basically they would get them, the CFO in Australia would just answer saying, is it profitable? The answer would be no, and that was it. They never looked into detail at the financial management reports, and they waited 3 years before doing this. Okay, in the internal audit, it was revealed that there were transfers occurring on a monthly basis from the joint venture to an individual. It was then revealed further in the audit that that individual was the brother of the joint venture partner. Brother was not employed by the company at all, but it was a way of remitting funds directly to him. It was almost close to 50,000 renminbi per month, which adds up after a 3-year period. In addition to that, the JV partner had registered the trademark of the Australian partner without informing them. The Australian partner had never registered their trademark, so it was obviously a breach within the Good Faith Act. And all of this internal audit basically revealed, a lot of distrust. But I'm not going to put the full blame on the joint venture partner, because in the Articles of Association, as well as the joint venture contract, it clearly stated that the Australian party had every right to hire their own financial accountant to review the books, and they never did it. They also never asked questions. So if you're not going to pay attention to your organization in China, of course mistakes are going to happen. Now, my assumption is that all of you are thinking, yeah, this all makes sense. We would never do this. You say that now, but I'm going to tell you in all honesty, for some reason, when people head to China, because of the cultural differences, the language barriers, for some reason, it puts a fear in individuals to not pay attention. And I don't always understand why there is that psychology behind it, but it happens to pretty much everybody, okay? Where you rely on the blind faith of your staff, or you rely on the blind faith of your business partners, versus taking responsibility yourself and getting into action and creating systems where you know exactly what's happening in your China business. So what are we covering today? All right. So for me, having been 16, 17 years, I have been burned numerous times, more so at the early stages of my China journey compared to now, because again, I'm more informed. I know how to create action plans. I'm very strict on what I do. So I do want to say people shouldn't have a fear when going into China. Okay, they shouldn't be nervous. They shouldn't be hesitant. You go to China, if you see that there's an opportunity and you are educated and you've done your research and you've got a business plan in place, then go to China. There are fantastic opportunities there, but make sure that you are creating a structure that first of all suits you, suits your needs, but where you are paying attention to it, okay? So it is a dream for anybody to go into international expansion into China. China is one of the largest markets, okay? But obviously that dream can turn into a nightmare if there are language issues, cultural barriers. You need to have people in place from the early days on that can help you overcome those barriers, okay? So, we don't want to turn that into a nightmare just because of a language and cultural issue. You also want to create a solid, flexible strategy in order to be able to develop your business in phases. Phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. Okay, you want to understand what implementation and execution models exist. Nobody has to set up an entity in China. Okay, nobody's forcing you to do that. You don't have to do that. You could easily do phase 1 or phase 2 from your home jurisdiction, cutting costs down. Okay, the biggest thing for me in my early days, because I didn't have a knowledge level, was the fact that there were so many nights I didn't sleep. I didn't sleep. And I was based in Shanghai. I was on the ground, okay? So now imagine if you're sitting in your head office, you're even more isolated from your China business. and you don't know what's happening in the day-to-day, okay? All I can tell you is you've got to create systems to make sure you know what is happening day in and day out. You've got to ask the questions, get connected. And I'm hoping that through COVID-19, that's actually what happened. I know it has happened for me, my organization, has happened through a lot of my clients' organizations, where it has forced people to get in touch with their offices on a day in, day out basis. And they are much more, they feel it's a much more transparent and clear organization than ever before. The key aspects regarding an organization in China, so this is about if you have a China subsidiary, is you want to know that your company is fully compliant. Now, I have had a lot of companies come to me utilizing a staff member that is brand new to incorporate a Chinese domestic entity to start building up their business. They are funding that entity from overseas, but they have no clue or transparency about what's going in that entity. Okay, and eventually they want that entity to become theirs. So they're looking to actually acquire 100% of the shares, but they've never seen a financial management report, and they're not obliged to, because the owner of that company is the staff member. He's not obliged to give them anything. If he doesn't want to, he owns the entity. He has bank account access. So you've got to also create systems in place where you know that your entity is in compliance. You know exactly what procedures you have to do on an annual basis or on a monthly basis or a quarterly basis, and you're getting updates and feedback of what is happening. Okay? Now imagine also, and this is the stage I'm at, imagine also being able to set up an entity in China or to transact in China and feeling that something's not right. You've got warning signs or red flags, and you have the ability to handle that solution immediately. Okay? Right now with COVID, nobody can fly anywhere. And that previously would have been my first suggestion. Take a plane and check what's going on. You can't do that now. So you need to have other solutions on your fingertips to know how to fix those things. The last 2 points are about reading and understanding and analyzing financial data. I do not want to hear excuses saying, oh, I got the report in Chinese. Yeah, translate it. Okay, a P&L is a P&L, a balance sheet is a balance sheet, a cash flow statement is a cash flow statement. Okay, translate it, have it translated. 3 documents, not going to be expensive. The numbers don't need to be translated. It's only the line item words that have to be translated. Read, understand, analyze. Okay, I'm going to go into this more detail later on when I talk about the superpowers. It would be amazing. I wish, and this is why I've created this method, I wish that people could avoid the most common obstacles. And those common obstacles are about having agreements in place, knowing what labor laws are, knowing what tax implications people have in China, and not getting caught out by having people trick you. Okay, and please don't put it in your head, oh yeah, the Chinese are really there to trick you. No. The trickiness and the cheating happens everywhere in the world. It happens in the US, happens in the UK, happens in Australia, happens in Germany. But if you don't pay attention to your business and you're not educated on what you need to know about either just simply transacting with China or setting up a subsidiary, then these common obstacles are always going to appear. Okay? What you did to set up your business in the headquarters is what you should be doing to set up your business in China. Okay? And the goal is ultimately that when you have all of these compliance and administrative procedures at hand, your sole focus will be on making decisions for the growth of your organization. That should be everyone's goal. That's my goal. I only want to focus on growth. How am I going to achieve getting new clients to work with me so I can build up my business and build up my client portfolio? How are you going to do that? How are you going to acquire new clients so that your focus can be on growth, knowing that the operational back end of your business is safe, compliant, and it's running like a machine? Okay, that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So the 4 biggest problems, just to sum up, that I see that entrepreneurs, leaders, they do, there's always a lack of communication with the China team. Don't forget, there are time zone issues, but there's no excuse. You have Zoom, you have GoToMeeting, you have team meetings from Microsoft, you have WeChat, you've got a telephone, There are so many ways you can communicate on a daily basis with your China operation or simply with the people you're transacting with. Don't turn a blind eye. It's no longer the case where you can say, oh, well, that's China. That used to be the case because things weren't always operationally above board. Now they are. Okay, so don't turn a blind eye and say, oh, well, that's China. If there is something that you don't feel good about, and that leads me to the ethical situations, raise your hand and get help. Okay, don't rush something if you're not feeling good about it. Okay, the last point is regarding, the last 2 points is the fourth point is regarding staff. So, you know, you'll get people who have inexperienced cheap staff or inexperienced and expensive staff, okay? Do you see the common denominator there? Inexperienced. You don't want to hire inexperienced people for China. You want to hire people who know their stuff, who know how to grow your business, who get excited with the thought of growing your business. And one tip that I'm going to highlight right here is when you do recruit people, ask them to do a project. Okay, when they're in the final round of interviews, ask them to create an action plan of what they would do in the first 3 to 6 months of coming on board to your organization. This will highlight if they're inexperienced. This will show you what ideas they have in terms of growing your business. This will allow you to share your vision with them about how you want to grow your business. And it will also show you how seriously that candidate takes that project. Okay, so just a tip when you're starting to interview people, and it can be for anybody, finance people, sales people, merchandisers, logistics. What would be their action plan in the first 3 to 6 months? Not difficult. Okay, they can create a beautiful PowerPoint presentation to show you. Last but not least, having no business plan, no strategy, and no budget to fall back on. I can't highlight this more, all right? And that's why it is a superpower in itself. But I don't even want to say how many people, but I have loads of companies that don't create business plans, strategies, or budget. They don't put pen to paper. Numbers are floating up in their head, but there's nothing concrete on paper for them to fall back on. There's no financial controlling mechanism to fall back on. You just overspend. And it can lead to so many other issues besides overspending. So please, please, please think about creating plan, budget, and strategy to fall back on. So what is the solution? All right, and I'm not saying that my solution is bulletproof, but it is a perfect starting point for you to think about your China journey and how your China journey should take place. So again, this is the roadmap. Opportunities, the first milestone. Implementation is the second, and growth is the third. So let's look at the various superpowers. So in opportunity, we're talking about awareness, being aware of the opportunity that exists in China. So you want to educate yourself, you want to do your research, you want to do a strategy and budget. So let's look at the first superpower, which is education. You are all here today on this webinar to educate yourselves, which is amazing, okay? You've got to create a knowledge base so that you have the ability to make appropriate decisions. Knowledge is power. I say this in almost every single webinar I do. Knowledge is power. Okay, so I want to give you a case study here of a client of mine, and this was very early back in the days. This was 2004, 2005. So a client back in those days had just started their business in China. They had one employee on staff. The employee had been working for them for about a 9-10 month period and had just kept asking for more salary, more bonus. And you could just tell the staff wasn't happy. But it got to a point at the 9-10th month where they were thinking of hiring the second staff. And they just thought to themselves, you know, with all this negativity and always asking for more salary and she's overworked and da-da-da-da-da, you know, it's not going to be great having a second staff on board and she basically filters this mindset to this new staff. It's just going to create a bad culture in the company. So they decided to terminate her. And instead of talking to a labor lawyer, talking to their payroll agent, talking to their corporate service provider, so that's just to highlight they had a network of people they could speak to. They terminated her based on how they terminate people in their head office. Okay, so it was a Friday, 5:30 p.m. They called her in the office and they told her that she was terminated. They had a check ready to provide the compensation amount. Again, they hadn't checked what was the termination laws and what type of compensation you have to provide. And in the meeting, she basically lost face. She couldn't believe that she was being terminated right there and then. She argued, she cried, she negotiated for a higher compensation, and she basically said she refuses to accept the check. She wants to have the compensation in cash. At that point, you're hitting 6:30 p.m., no opportunity to call a lawyer, no opportunity to call the service provider, no opportunity to call the payroll agent. Everybody was shut for the weekend. Now, as a result of all of this, she refused to give back the key of the office, and she wasn't going to leave the office until she received the cash. So what happened was that one of the staff members that had come from the head office went to an ATM machine and withdrew 70,000 RMB in compensation, because that's what she asked for, just to settle the case. Okay. Now, if they would have educated themselves, they would have saved about 50,000 RMB in cost if they had known what the laws and regulations were. Okay, but they had no leverage over her. She just kept saying, well, in China it's like this, and they didn't know how to answer that. They didn't know the laws in China. So be prepared. Obtain your knowledge before you take action. And this is a case about a labor termination. Okay, again, 3 avenues that they could have gone to: lawyer, payroll agent, corporate service provider, and they didn't. They winged it, basically. And as they winged it, they lost basically 50,000 RMB in cash, which came out of the budget and affected that year's budget. All right, so a little bit of a lesson there for them. In future, I mean, they got everybody on their speed dial. The lawyer's mobile number, corporate service provider's mobile number, payroll agent's mobile number. Everybody they needed, they got onto their mobile number, knowing that they could reach them in any situation. But it was also a learning curve to understand that their knowledge base was limited and that China does not work like their head office jurisdiction. It's different. Okay, so how are you all going to educate yourself? You're going to educate yourself in a lot of free ways. I'm not going to give you anything here except 2 items where it'll be paid, but even there you can get free data because I know everyone is on a cost budget. Okay, so how can you educate yourself? First of all, reach out to lawyers, and if you don't want to actually reach out to a physical lawyer, reach out to a lawyer company's website and subscribe yourself to their articles, their webinars, their informational sessions, their meetings, etc., their networking events, whatever there might be. There are hundreds of thousands of law firms in Shanghai alone, or in Beijing, or in Guangzhou. You just have to subscribe on their website, okay? And you'll get information in English language. Corporate service providers, I'm one of those, but there are hundreds and thousands of us out there that are offering free content for people to understand how China works. Subscribe to their articles, their webinars, their informational sessions. Chambers of commerce. So you have the ability to subscribe to their newsletters free of charge without becoming a member. Okay, so for example, if you are from the UK, join the British Chamber of Commerce in Shanghai, or join the British Chamber of Commerce in Beijing, or in Wuhan, or in, I don't know how many there are. I think there are 5 or 6 chambers just for UK in China. Okay, just subscribe free to their newsletter. If you really enjoy it and you find out there's value, become a member. You can become a small SME member. okay? And then you can join actually more functions as a member. Or join your China Country Association. So again, I'm going to use the UK as an example. You've got the China-Britain Business Council. Based in the UK, based out of London is the head office, but they've got business advisors throughout the country. You can also get on their newsletter free of charge. Okay, you may have to be a member to join their webinars, networking events, or informational sessions, but they're fantastic avenues for you to gain data and information. You also have the EU SME Center. So currently the EU SME Center is on hold because they're going through a reapplication of with the EU government for subsidies and whatnot for China. However, if you go to their website, you can still gain free research reports on food and beverage sectors, on a variety of different things. Okay, so in the UK, you've got the CBBC, you've got Invest Hong Kong, you've got the Hong Kong Trade Development Council. In Germany, you've got China Forum Bayern, you've got the Ostasiatische Verein, you've got the Deutsch-Chinesische Wirtschaftsvereinigung, you've got Invest Hong Kong, Hong Kong Trade Development Council. In China, you've got the American Chamber of Commerce, the British Chamber of Commerce, the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, German Chamber of Commerce, you've got the Finnish Business Council, the Nordic countries have each their own individual chambers as well. It is phenomenal, okay? You've got all of these avenues to get free content, okay? Now, one point I wanna highlight is most people also do Google searches, which by all means you can do. My tip, however, with the Google searches is the following. Updates of regulations in China are frequent. So, for example, we're now in June 2020. I would not read anything from prior to June 2019. Always look at content that is at least a year old, because there are so many changes that if you read older content, you will be reading different information, and then you'll get confused. And nobody wants to get you confused. China is confusing enough as it is. So when you do your Google searches, please just focus on reading content that is less than a year old, okay? So this is superpower number one, which is education. And please, again, this is a continuous superpower. I still do it after 17 years in the market, okay? I follow my competitors. I wanna know what they're saying, because maybe they've learned something quicker than I have. I follow law firms. They're my partners. But I also want to know what they are publishing to understand what their experiences have been. It gives me insight as to how certain things might work for companies in China. This is all about education, and everybody who is doing business there should be continuing their education. So in regards to superpower number two, it is research. When you are evaluating an opportunity, but also when you have found an opportunity and you're transacting with China, your research should also be continuous, because your research will be the foundation of making decisions in China. There are a variety of ways of doing research. It can be market segmentation, product testing, advertising testing, satisfaction and loyalty analyses, brand awareness, pricing research, competitor benchmarking. You need to have this data to evaluate whether, first of all, opportunities exist, and to what extent do those opportunities exist, and how to then attack the market, okay? I do a competitor benchmarking on an annual basis. I wanna know how my competitors are doing, okay? It gives me insight into the sector, okay? I do a pricing research with my competitors because it gives me insight to how people are increasing or decreasing their prices depending on the type of service. I am fully aware of what is happening in the Chinese market based on my sector. You need to be fully aware of the market based on your sector and your industry. So in the registration report of today's webinar, I had a lot of questions from companies about whether I was going to touch on their specific sectors. I'm not. Okay, but there are people on here from pharma, medical device, software, sweets, food and beverage, kitchens, educational products and tools, architecture and design. Okay, those are the ones that ask the questions. If you want to know more about your sector, these are the types of research you have to do. Okay, And my first avenue for you would be go to the EU SME site, or go, for example, if you're from the UK, go to the China-Britain Business Council. They will already have some reports available. But again, check the date of those free reports to know when they have been published. I really would be very careful, again, about looking at anything that's over a year old, because for me, that's already pretty outdated when you're looking at research results. Times have changed, okay? So that's the first part, all right? Now, when you're doing these research methods, there's obviously a variety of techniques that you can do. So one is secondary research, sitting on your computer and doing research through your computer, conducting surveys, conducting focus groups, interviews, simple observations. So my husband is in the food and beverage sector, and I can tell you that whichever country we travel to, he can spend close to 2 hours in a supermarket to observe one specific aisle, looking at how the product is put on the shelf, looking at the pricing, and this is what he does in his own free time, because he really enjoys doing that. But he does it in his own free time, and it gives him a market perspective. So it's his simple way of observing the market. And then obviously you can also do experiments and field trials, okay? But these are the types of research methodologies that you can use. And for many of these things, it's not necessary if you really want to outsource it to a company and pay that cost. A lot of it you can also do from your desk. If you have WeChat and you have access to WeChat, then you have access to a network of people that you're connecting to where you can ask them to conduct surveys. You can create those focus groups, or you can ask them to do one-on-one interviews to get a better understanding. So that's probably a first avenue you could potentially take, is through your own WeChat connections in China. So superpower 3 is then actually physically putting pen to paper and creating a strategy, a game plan for the Chinese market, okay? And my recommendation is always to create a phased business plan. So phase 1 will be that you do, and this is an example, phase 1 will be that you do business from your head office direct in China. Phase 2 will be that maybe you hire somebody on the ground who acts as a sales manager for you to test out the market and see if there's an even greater potential by having someone on the ground. Phase 3 might then be, okay, we're actually going to have an establishment in China. And those 3 phases could take 5 years, they could take 10 years, depending on the commitment you're putting into the China journey, the risk level, and the resources, both financial and manpower. Okay, but you've got to put pen to paper. Another reason I say why you've got to put pen to paper is because a lot of people are looking for investors today. If you don't put pen to paper and it's not a logical business plan or budget, you're not going to attract any investor. They're going to think you're not taking this seriously. So do think about putting it to pen to paper. Now, I don't want to go through the next slides in detail, but I am offering this all to you for free of charge. If you are struggling to create a business plan or a budget, this for me are the key chapters that you should put in your business plan, and the content that should go into each of these chapters. I've also given here some benefits as to why I recommend this, because you should also be creating negative scenarios and positive scenarios. I've also given to you here regarding your budget, why you should be creating a budget, a basic budget to start off with. These are the benefits for year 1, and these are the benefits for year 2. Basically, why is a budget so important? Because it acts as a financial control system. So if you don't have the ability to hire a financial controller to keep track of your expenses or the revenue that's coming in, then your budget should act as that tool, okay? And then, you know, these are always questions that you should ask yourself. So when you've done your price benchmarking, or you've analyzed your competitors, right? These are things you should be asking yourselves about pricing, about putting new products in that are different from your competitors, about cost of goods and services, etc. These are just, again, trigger questions I want you to have, so it makes it a little bit easier to know how to put pen to paper. Now, just some tips about putting things pen to paper. Don't rush. Do it right. Think about every aspect. Be conservative. I love that people are enthusiastic about China, but especially with COVID-19 and more importantly about just simply entering a new market. I hope the case studies have highlighted some of that. Enthusiasm is great, but disappointment really brings you down and might even put a bad mouth in your taste about China. So be conservative about your business plan and your budget. Create some slack and wiggle room. You know, I always feel it's better to be to get better results, and even if you know, create conservative data for your business plan and budget, you get better results. It just increases your motivation to do more. Okay, and start start all of these processes early. As a key point, the fiscal year in China is January to December. So when you're creating your budgets, think about a fiscal year that is January to December. And when you create your business plans and your budgets, don't put them in a drawer. With COVID-19, I have actually had to update my budget on a monthly basis based on the current situation that is happening. Usually I do it biannually, but please use those documents as tools to monitor, evaluate, and reforecast. Okay? So have you been able to evaluate the opportunity for China? And I would love to hear your feedback. So this is an interaction point. Okay, I'm not going to stop the presentation, but let me know. Have you been able to evaluate an opportunity and gone through those 3 steps of educating yourself, doing that research? What type of research did you do? Was it enough? And you've actually put now pen to paper. I'd love to be able to hear your thoughts on that. And has the outcome then been that you've been able to evaluate, you know, the opportunity for China? The next step, or the next milestone, sorry, is implementation. So knowledge has been attained, research has been conducted, and strategy has been written down, discussed, and thought through. So now it is actually time to put the strategy into action. Okay, what do we need to do to start the business, to protect our brand, protect ourselves, as well as the actual business and the head office? Okay, so here it's about basically implementing the back end of that operation. Okay, now some people will say that superpower 4 should be number 1. I honestly think all of these superpowers have to happen in conjunction one with another. Okay, when you're creating your strategy, you're also creating the implementation of that strategy in that business plan. So it all comes sort of hand in hand together. Okay, developing an ecosystem is extremely important to build and grow your business. It is all about networking. So I had a question that was made in the registration form about how important is it to have relationships with certain people to get, for example, licenses issued, etc. It is not as important as it used to be. I will say that. But having guanxi, having important relationships at your fingertips, having a network of individuals that can help you to grow your business, having a network of mentors that can help you to grow your business and refer your business is so important for everybody. So what's amazing to me is whenever I go on a conference in Europe or in the US, nobody hands out name cards. And I always found this so strange because really that's the culture in China. You want to be able to network with as many people as you possibly can. So you've got always name cards in your pocket, even on your free time when you're on the weekends, you've always got name cards in your bag. You're always giving out name cards. And the reason you're doing that is because you want to see whether that person can help you build your business. In Europe and in the US, nobody does it. And when I started asking people, why don't you give it out? They said, we don't want to get spammed. Their thought process was so negative versus thinking positively about growing their business. Now today, instead of name cards, you have WeChat. And if you don't have WeChat, it's very difficult to grow your business, okay? You need to create your ecosystem through WeChat, okay? And you can go today and set up your individual account. You will need somebody in China to verify that account. So if you need help, let me know. I may be able to help you on that. but WeChat is an invaluable resource for you, okay? Now, where are you gonna meet people? There's several ways to meet or connect with people in China. So the first will be at the trade shows. All right, so right now we can't do face-to-face trade shows, but there is the option of having virtual trade shows, right? So for example, the Canton Fair, that was all based on a virtual trade show. And I do know that in Europe now, there are also several trade shows that are being done on a virtual basis, okay? So make sure you've got WeChat and that you have the ability to to connect with individuals, okay? Connect with as many individuals as possible. People don't want to receive emails. They want to be connected on WeChat. You got LinkedIn China, for example, okay? So don't just connect to people on WeChat, connect to people on LinkedIn. Show them that you are an expert in your field. That's marketing 101, okay? Connect to those people through those two avenues, WeChat as well as LinkedIn. And remember to always maintain those relationships. Don't just connect and say, oh, thanks for the connection. Have a discussion, talk with each other, okay? You also have mini programs on WeChat, or you've got group chats from the chambers of commerce that you can also ask to join. And that's also great. So with the chambers of commerce, you'll have, for example, the main group, which provides articles and publications and news. And then you'll have another chat group where people can actually ask questions and have conversations. What you can't do right now are chamber networking events, but if you guys will eventually go back to China for business trips, go to chamber networking events. Pay as a non-member fee and go and shake hands and distribute your WeChat or your name card. It's your QR code on WeChat or your name card, so you start interacting and meeting with people, okay? Everybody is a good connection. Never think that somebody is a negative connection. You never know what that person will bring you in the long term, okay? So always have these conversations, develop that community, that ecosystem on your WeChat for your China business. And I can't emphasize that more, okay? So as I gave you the case study earlier, right? That company could have called 3 different people: payroll agent, labor lawyer, or corporate service provider. Okay, back in those days, WeChat didn't exist, and messaging, SMSing was also not really very popular. So how times have changed. But have those people connected to you on WeChat. Have the most important aspects of your ecosystem connected on WeChat. So you can always go to somebody for advice, brainstorming session. If you want to refer or you need a referral, you know, you've got to develop that ecosystem. Okay, it's all about sharing ideas and sharing connections so that you can build up your business. And never think that someone is a bad connection. Eventually, they might become a very good one. All right, so that's all about the ecosystem. And ecosystem, again, you don't start on day 1 and stop on day 1. It's something that is absolutely continuous. So for everybody that's on here today, if you want to build your ecosystem, connect with me on WeChat. I'm going to type in my ID right now, and you can connect. I'll be your first connection if you've never used WeChat before. Okay, but connect. All right, then we're going to look at superpower number 5, which is about protection. And I think it's really important to say that fraud does exist in China. As we all know, we've seen it in the media, but fraud also exists in the US, it also exists in the UK, it also exists in Australia, it also exists in Canada. It's not just China, okay? So you need to protect yourself, because if fraud does happen, it might surprise you when it comes, okay? So I had one client, very late in the game, they registered their trademark in China. 9 months down the line, they find out that an IP hijacker had actually registered their trademark 2 weeks before they had, and had every single right to that mark. Okay, so fraud does exist, and it can come from anywhere when you least expect it. So you want to make sure you're protected. You may have very high expectations in the new market, and you might have very high expectations about the business culture. Okay, You might be very excited. That doesn't mean you shouldn't protect your business. That should be your primary focus initially, okay? And please remember that fraud can happen from anywhere. It can happen in-house from employees. It can happen from suppliers. It can happen from customers. It can happen from complete strangers, okay? So be wary of the amount of trust and loyalty you give into certain people, especially if you're a newbie and you're starting up your business, all right? Think about protection first. Now, why is this important? I can tell you, I have not had a single friend, client, myself, who has not been frauded. And my assumption is that it will happen to many of you along your China journey, not just related to trademark, but related to anything, okay? These things happen. And I do not want to say that it's part of the China culture. It is on how just generally people do business, because fraud exists throughout the world, okay? But how do we protect ourselves? How can we stop this? How can we stop people from taking things that are valuable to us and important to us? Okay, so let me know, have you been frauded? Has it left a bad taste in your mouth? It has for me in many instances. It's also, in some instances, I lost faith in doing business in China. And it has for many clients. I've had clients who've also exited China because of the frauding aspect. So I would love to know if you've been experienced by fraud or if you feel like it's happening. So here I'm giving you 7 bullet points of what you need to think about when it comes to protecting yourself and your business. 1, protect your intellectual property. Okay, copyrights, patents, trademarks. Number 2, think about corporate governance. And I say this with or without having a structure in China. Make sure there is corporate governance in relation to your business. You don't want people getting kickbacks from suppliers, okay? You don't want any under-table dealings occurring. So make sure there's a corporate governance guideline. Due diligence procedures. Are you vetting people, companies? Okay, you can vet employees, you can vet companies, you can do background checks. Are you doing that? All right. Something that is not necessarily expensive. And a lot of it can be done at your desktop. I touched on this point very specifically in my last webinar series, if you want to go back to that. If you have an entity in China, the use of company chops is extremely important. Do you have operational guidelines on that? And then very simply, 5, 6, and 7, this has to do whether you have an entity in China or you don't. But do you have system processes in place for trade transactions, service transactions, inventory, and warehousing systems? Do you have applicable tools, whether they be software tools or other forms of tools, to help you to develop operational guidelines or protection guidelines for your company? I can't emphasize this slide more. This should be taken very seriously. Okay, and usually people are so focused on their core business of selling in China or working with their suppliers that all of these aspects don't become important anymore until the day you get frauded, and then you're in trouble. And you're sort of like, why didn't I do that? Okay, so I've only listed 7 points here, but please, please, please think about these things. Whether you are simply transacting with China or whether you are actually setting up an entity in China. Superpower number 6, system processes. Actually implementing the system processes. Okay, so I've highlighted here what you got to think about in terms of protecting. Now we want to implement those protection methods, which are called system processes. So you want to create internal operational guidelines and management directives. This point, highly important whether you have an entity in China or you don't. Even if you're simply transacting with China, do you have an operational guideline? How do you vet a supplier, or how do you vet a customer? How do you vet a logistics provider, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and management directives. Who's going to sign off on a deal? Start doing health checks and internal audits. If you have an entity in China, do due diligences, actually implement that in your operational guideline that maybe due diligences should occur. Think about the appointment of who's going to be appointed in relation to the China business within your own organization. And that can be people from the head office, or if you're going to hire people locally, okay? Build your ecosystem of China experts, okay? Not just me, okay? I'm just a corporate service provider, okay? You need to have experts in public relations, in marketing, in e-commerce, in logistics, in warehousing, in HR, in headhunting, a lawyer, an auditor, and the list can go on, depending on what business and sector you're in. Okay, so build your ecosystem of China experts who are there to help you. They are the ones who are on your speed dial, okay, in case something happens. And then, you know, it's all good and well writing an operational guideline. It's really going to bother the person who wrote it if it's never implemented. Okay, so if you're going to take the time to actually build these directives and these guidelines and build this ecosystem of individuals and whatnot, implement it, actually implement it. Sign off on it and get it implemented. Okay, I always say preemption by action is your best and least expensive form of protection. Create an action plan today. It's your to-do list of what you need to do to implement your business. Okay. Now, have you been able to implement your strategy successfully? Okay. Now, one of the questions that did come up in the registration form was in regards to understanding the modes of or the types of business models that can be created. There are a lot of different types of business models that can be created depending on the phase that you're looking to get into. And that should all be part of understanding the opportunity side of things, okay? So when I'm saying, have you been able to implement your strategy, it actually means, have you been able to implement the business model for the various phases that you're creating, okay? If you have, and your back end is bullet tight, then you can focus on growth. And for me, this is fundamental that you need to do to focus on growth. There are going to be other aspects that you have to consider as well, but this is truly what is fundamental to make decisions, okay? So you've started transacting in China, and now comes the critical milestone of growth and acceleration, okay? And everyone wants to move forward in China, everyone wants to expand in China, so you've got to follow these three principles of numbers, analysis, and focus. Okay, so numbers. You've got to create a sound accounting system, and you've got to be able to look, read, and understand those China figures, whether that's being done on the ground in China or whether that's being done by your head office. So if you have your own company in China, are you checking those numbers on a monthly basis? Financial management reports have to be produced on a monthly basis. You are being given the opportunity to analyze those on a monthly basis. Are you receiving the financial management reports from your team on a monthly basis? Are you receiving them in English? Do you question them? Do you understand them? If you don't have a company in China, but are transacting with China, do you have a separate revenue line item and cost line item and expense line item associated with the China business so that you can understand that growth? Okay. Now, I know I'm a corporate service provider, but I will completely highlight this, okay? Accountants are not the most proactive of people. They're also not the most sociable of people, which is why if you are responsible for the China business, go to the accountant. Tell them, I want a meeting for 1 hour or 2 hours, and I want to go through every single line item of that financial management report to understand what is going on. I want to analyze it, which is the next superpower. I want to analyze it against the budget with the actuals to really understand what the current status is. okay? If you can't analyze those numbers and you can't understand what is the current status of that entity or that business line item within your headquarter, how can you make any decisions about increasing headcount, about putting a new product into the market, about deleting a product from the market, about adding a service into the line item? I can't tell you during COVID-19 how vital it has been for companies to analyze their reports so that they have the ability to pivot their business during COVID-19 and look for new revenue channels, to cut down costs, to look at the general administration expenses and say, okay, well, there's certain things that we've got to cut now, whether that be headcount, reduce the rent, something. Okay, how can you make those decisions and then survive in a period like COVID-19 if you don't analyze your financials, right? How can you grow and accelerate your business if you can't analyze the financials? Okay, you know, I mean, I have people on the ground. Well, let me just use my own company. I will have my head of client services tell me, Christina, you know, we're picking up clients, we need to hire more people. I'm like, you know what? We're going to sit down. We're going to look at our financial management report. We're going to see how well we're really doing to see whether we hire more people. Yeah, you've got to really go into those details. So the last superpower is looking at focus. Okay, your goal is to focus on your strategy and implement that strategy. Focus on sales. Focus on the growth and development of your business. Okay. So this is also why your strategy and your budget have to be flexible. They have to be amendable. You have to be able to reforecast so that you can make decisions in a very fast-paced country. Okay, during COVID-19, things slowed down considerably. But now, as China has been opening up, okay, right now, except for Beijing, the country is pretty much at normal. So it's back up at speed. And you've got to be back up at speed with it. And you've got to make decisions on how you're going to push your company forward, all right? So you've got to focus. And the biggest question that I would have for anybody is, do you have the ability right now to focus? And are you focusing on the strategy and the growth plan? Or very simply, right now, are you focusing on survival? Okay, could also be with COVID-19. I will honestly say up until April, I was focusing on survival. Now, as things have become more normal, I'm focusing on growth again. So I've been amending, adapting. So I have something to fall back on as things are progressing. It's a very unique year. Who would have ever thought, right? But that's the end of the superpowers. But let's refresh. 3 milestones, 9 superpowers. For each superpower, you guys have now a bullet point list of how to build on that superpower. You've got an action plan. And whether you have an entity in China or you do not have an entity in China, you should be implementing this roadmap. It should be your guideline. It should have all of the bullet points in there for you to be aware of what you need to watch out for or what you need to create to make sure that your focus can be on the core business and can be actually on growth. So what is the summary from my perspective? The summary for me is educate yourself on your business, okay? Again, there are a lot of free avenues to do that, but also do research. Have another set of eyes guiding you. I think it's really important to have a mentor of sorts or a coach or somebody who's in the market that can answer your questions and brainstorm with you and validate maybe your ideas and your budgets. I wish I had had that back in the day, somebody to have fallen back on, to brainstorm with, talk to, hash out ideas, etc. And it doesn't just have to be one person, mind you. It can be a variety of people. Create internal operational guidelines and management directives, okay, to protect your business and to implement systems. And then hire experts in your field. I mean, hire experts in your field that are going to help you to grow and protect your business. Okay. How we can help you? Well, we can put you on the China Roadmap method. We have a coaching program that helps you to develop your action plans and makes you accountable for them. In addition, we provide honest and ethical advisory. I won't ever tell somebody that they have to set up in China. It's completely up to their level of commitment, their level of risk, and what they're looking to do. Okay. And then we can also help with implementation and growth services, which is everything from incorporating to developing trademark registrations, doing due diligences, helping to create operational guidelines, management directives, etc. So if you want to set up a strategy session with me to discuss your China roadmap, you can click on this link. I'm going to put it here now. And then we will start hitting on the questions that have come in. You already have my WeChat ID. If you want my email, you can also email me at Christina@woodburnglobal.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. So on LinkedIn, you can find me with my name, Christina Colucci at Woodburn. All right, so let's hit the questions. Oh, quite a few that have come in. Okay, we'll go through them one by one. So, oh, this is lovely. People have actually been sharing. So Kim, I'm going to add this joke because I love it. Kim was saying, if we graduate, do we get a cape with all the superpowers? I wish, but that might be something I give the folks that are in my coaching program on there. So Jihong, you were asking, for pricing research, is it reliable to use an e-commerce platform such as JD.com, Taobao, Alibaba? That should be one of your avenues. Not the sole avenue, but it should be one of your avenues. Absolutely. You might find that there's different pricing on the different platforms themselves. But it again, depending on the industry and the sector that you're in, e-commerce is one sales avenue. It's not the sole sales avenue. So you may want to check e-commerce to other sales channels and avenues to have a comparison of what the pricing is on the various platforms. Okay, I hope I answered your question on that. Mustafa was asking, I would rather ask you to do the research and develop the methodology rather than getting lost in the ocean of information. So Mustafa, I don't offer services in research, but there are plenty of people out there that can physically do the research and develop the methodology and give you then at the end a report or a presentation on the findings. Absolutely. So you can definitely outsource that to companies who are specific and would also then give you guidance on the type of research you should be doing. I just want to highlight here, when you're thinking about research, whether Jihong or Mustafa, it's not a one-time research. You know, when you're thinking about pricing, it's not that you do the pricing today and then you don't do the pricing next week. Pricing consistently changes. So your pricing research has to also be continuous, whether you do it biannually, monthly, or annually. You have to do it based on your industry and your sector, but it is a continuous process. When you're doing, for example, a brand awareness study, you need to know today, do people know my brand, right? And obviously a lot of the marketing agencies will do this brand awareness study for you, right? So they'll do a brand awareness today, and then they'll put you on a campaign, a marketing campaign. And then it would be great to understand 1 year later, you know, what's my brand awareness 1 year later based on these campaigns? Hopefully it's gone up. By how much is the critical question, because you want to know whether these e-campaigns are relevant or not to garnering brand awareness. Okay, so you know, you can do a brand awareness study today, you do one next year, you do one the year after. There are certain researches that you have to do on a continuous basis. I love it. Martin is already in the process of putting pen to paper and developing his strategy. That's amazing, Martin. If you need to have a brainstorming session, let me know. Happy to help you validate it, question mark it, red mark it, anything that you like. Okay, I'm just going through, there's a lot of comments as well. All right, so the last one was regarding Mustafa, was regarding Martin. Mustafa was explaining a little bit his own personal strategy, which I won't highlight on here, but I completely understand your perspective, Mustafa, on what you're doing as well, and taking it in stages and looking at what's happening with COVID and how things are evolving in Europe and in the US first. Makes complete sense. So that's all the questions have come in. Was I that transparent and clear? Can't believe it. I'm gonna stick around. So if you guys want to type in stuff now, you're more than welcome to. I appreciate everyone that's given me a bit of background on themselves. I'll also be reading those as we go on. All right, again, if you want to set up a brainstorming session, listen, these strategy sessions, they're free of charge. Okay, I don't want you guys to feel like it's too much to have a talk with me or something like that. These are free of charge, no strings attached. It's just to have a brainstorming session to see if I can help you in any way or help you validate things in any way. Okay, so feel free to connect. You can do it by setting up in my diary or WeChatting me or sending an email or connecting with me on LinkedIn. And as I highlighted, we have this webinar series that's coming up end of July, where I will be doing a webinar session purely on market research. I'll be doing a webinar session purely on setting up a structure by not having an entity in China. I'll be looking at the benefits of a rep office in China, because I do still sometimes get questions on that. And then I will be talking about how to set up a business in China and what it actually takes and what are the important aspects around setting up a business in China. So if you're interested in that, I'm also going to put in our website here so you can get directed to it as well. There we go. So I want to thank everybody for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope that today's presentation was useful to you. Again, I'm going to be hanging on here because some people have added other notes now, so I'll answer those as well. But thank you again for joining, and I hope to see you at the end of July. Take care and goodbye.